in count 2, a Class A felony. Murder in the first degree in count 3, a Class A felony. Murder in the first degree in count 4, a Class A felony. Murder in the first degree in count 5, a Class A felony. Murder in the first degree in count 6, a Class A felony. Murder in the first degree in count 7, a Class A felony. Murder in the first degree in count 8, a Class A felony. Murder in the first degree in count 9.
He sat in the front pew every Sunday, leading prayers with quiet authority. His voice calm, his posture composed. He walked the aisles of his church with a clipboard in one hand, a Bible in the other. To the congregation he was a man of order, a leader, a husband, a father. A man you could trust to keep your secrets, to guide your family, to uphold the rules that held a neighborhood together. He wore pressed shirts, tucked in with precision. He clocked into his job at city code enforcement on time. He waved at neighbors. He trimmed his hedges. He coached his children's teams and took pride in his lawn. Wichita, Kansas never gave him a second look. But across those same quiet streets, someone was cutting phone lines. Someone was slipping into homes in the early morning hours. Someone was binding men, women, and children with ropes and shoelaces, and watching them suffocate. Families vanished in silence. Police followed trails that led nowhere. News anchors called him a ghost. Then the letters came. Typed confessions, taunts, lists of victims. He gave himself a name, BTK. He craved recognition. He wasn't finished. Not yet. And all the while he went back to work. Back to church. Back to dinner at the table. The man behind the curtain wasn't a shadowy figure hiding in the alley. He was standing in plain sight. This is the story of Dennis Rader. This is the story of how a town lived beside a man it never really knew. This is BTK. Wichita, Kansas in the 1970s carried the easy rhythm of a small Midwestern city, where the air was filled with the sounds of lawnmowers, kids playing in the streets, and the distant hum of life moving predictably from one day to the next. It was a place where people left their doors unlocked, where Sunday service was sacred, and where a handshake still meant something. A city where families flourished and danger always felt far away. Among its modest homes and tree-lined neighborhoods lived Dennis Rader, a man whose life on the surface was as ordinary as anyone else's. Born in 1945 in Pittsburgh, Kansas, Dennis was the first of 4 boys in a working-class family. His childhood was unremarkable, quiet, structured, and disciplined. His parents worked long hours, often leaving him alone with his thoughts, which even then had begun to drift into strange territory. But to everyone around him, Dennis was just a reserved boy, the kind who followed the rules and stayed out of trouble. After high school he joined the U.S. Air Force, where he served for 4 years, traveling to bases in Japan, Korea, and Greece. When he returned he settled in Wichita, married a local woman named Paula Dietz, and started what appeared to be a picture-perfect life. A steady job, a home in the suburbs, and 2 children he doted on. He worked for ADT Security for several years before becoming a city compliance officer, a role that allowed him to enforce municipal codes and hand out citations for things like overgrown lawns or abandoned vehicles. To some, he seemed a little too passionate about the rules, a bit too stern when it came to property lines and fence heights, but no one thought much of it. That was just Dennis. At Christ Lutheran Church he was even more respected. He didn't just attend, he led. As president of the church council, he organized events, managed budgets, and led prayers. He helped maintain the building, volunteered his time, and presented himself as a man of discipline and moral values. He was the kind of neighbor who waved as he mowed the lawn, showed up early for church potlucks, and helped carry groceries for the elderly. His children knew him as a strict but dependable father. His co-workers saw him as methodical and serious. His congregation viewed him as a pillar of their community. He didn't drink. He didn't swear. He didn't cause scenes. He was never late, never messy, never loud. And in that ordinary routine, Dennis Rader crafted his greatest disguise, the image of a man who posed no threat, who lived by the rules, who did what was expected. But beneath the surface, Dennis was quietly feeding darker desires. He kept notebooks filled with disturbing fantasies. He studied other killers. He took photographs of himself in elaborate self-made bondage setups, carefully hiding them from view. For years, those urges remained locked behind closed doors, buried beneath the camouflage of a calm, suburban life. No one asked questions. No one saw signs. Because Dennis Rader didn't look like a killer. And in a town like Wichita he knew that would be enough. On the morning of January 15, 1974, Wichita, Kansas, woke up to the winter chill like any other day. The Otero family, a loving and tight-knit household, began their daily routine on the east side of town. Joseph Otero, 38, a veteran of the Air Force, had just returned to civilian life and taken a job as an instructor. His wife Julie, 34, a strong, quiet woman devoted to her children, was preparing breakfast. 11-year-old Josephine was getting ready for school, chatting with her mother as she laced up her shoes. Her little brother, 9-year-old Joseph Jr., was still rubbing the sleep from his eyes. The house was full of the ordinary sounds of life, cereal being poured, lunchboxes being packed, voices echoing in the kitchen. No one knew they had been targeted. That morning Dennis Rader waited. He had chosen the Otero family carefully. He had stalked them, studied their habits, and watched the children play. When he approached the house, he was prepared: gloves, rope, a gun, and a plan. He entered the home just after 8 a.m., confronting Julie and Joseph at gunpoint. He told them it was a robbery, that he only needed money and a car. But it was a lie. Every word, every movement was part of a fantasy he had rehearsed over and over in his mind. He tied Joseph and Julie up, forcing the children to sit nearby. Then he took control, slowly, deliberately, cruelly. Joseph Otero was the first to die, strangled with a cord until his body went limp. Julie was next. She pleaded with him, begged for her children's lives. He showed no mercy. He killed 9-year-old Joseph Jr. next, methodically tightening the cord around the boy's neck. But it was Josephine's death that would haunt the city most. Rader took her to the basement, hung her from a pipe, and watched her die. She was just 11. And he later admitted, in chilling detail, that her death gave him the most satisfaction. That was the kind of monster hiding behind Dennis Rader's calm, clean-shaven exterior. By the time the children returned home from school that afternoon, the house was still. Too still. A family friend discovered the bodies. First responders were stunned. Hardened officers wept. No forced entry. No apparent motive. Just calculated, intimate murder. Wichita had never seen anything like it. The city fell into collective shock. Who could commit such a brutal act, not in anger but with planning, control, and cold detachment? Who would target a family, children, and kill them with such methodical cruelty? The Otero family didn't have enemies. They didn't live in fear. Yet, within the walls of their home, an unthinkable evil had unfolded and vanished. Police launched a massive investigation. Detectives worked around the clock. Evidence was collected, interviews conducted, and yet, there was nothing. No fingerprints. No witnesses. No known motive. The killer had left only terror behind. And the city was left to wonder, was this random? Would he strike again? Was Wichita still safe? Surviving members of the Otero family would later speak through tears about the nightmare that shattered their world. They remembered the love, the laughter, and the normalcy of that morning, and how in just minutes it was all stolen. And somewhere in Wichita, Dennis Rader was watching the news. Quiet. Come. Please. He had finally lived out the fantasy. And now the hunt, and the game had begun. He didn't just want to kill, he wanted to be known for it. After the horror of the Otero murders, police scrambled for answers but none came. Weeks passed. Then months. Wichita slowly tried to settle back into routine. But on October 1974, nearly 10 months after the Oteros were found, a manila envelope appeared at the local Wichita Eagle newspaper office. Inside was a typed letter, calm, cold, and horrifying. The writer claimed responsibility not just for the Otero murders, but for more to come. He detailed the killings with facts only the killer could know. He ended it with a chilling phrase, "I did it myself with no one's help. The code word for me will be BTK, which stands for bind them, torture them, kill them. Yours truly, guiltily BTK." It was the first time the world would see the name he had given himself. Dennis Rader had grown impatient. It wasn't enough to kill. He wanted credit. He wanted headlines. He needed recognition. He wanted the world to know that he was in control, and he would not be ignored. Just months after the Oteros, on April 4, 1974, 21-year-old Catherine Bright and her brother Kevin returned home to their small duplex. Dennis Rader had been waiting. He forced them inside at gunpoint, tied them up, and began his ritual. But something went wrong. Kevin Bright, just 19 years old, fought back. Rader shot him in the head point blank, but Kevin survived. Bleeding and dazed, he stumbled outside for help. Inside the house, Catherine was not as lucky. She had been stabbed multiple times. She died from her wounds before help could arrive. Rader vanished again into thin air. But Kevin Bright's survival gave police something rare, a living witness. He described the attacker as calm, collected, almost robotic. He recalled the chilling way he spoke, the way he smiled, the way he enjoyed it. Kevin's courage and survival nearly brought Rader into the light, but the killer stayed one step ahead. The FBI was brought in. A psychological profile was created. They said BTK was methodical, organized, likely a white male in his 30s or 40s, intelligent, employed, possibly married, someone who blended in with his community, someone who needed to feel superior, someone who wanted the power of life and death in his hands. BTK wrote again, this time to local news stations and police. He taunted detectives. He mocked their inability to catch him. He corrected mistakes in their public statements. In one letter he said, "I'm sorry this happened to the society, but crime is a big business." He signed it BTK. Always BTK. Criminologists began to see a pattern, not just in the killings but in the behavior. He was not killing out of rage or desperation. He was killing for attention, for legacy, for fame. He was staging murders and then writing letters like they were press releases. His ego needed to be fed, and every time police failed to identify him, he grew bolder. He wanted the media to report his name. He wanted to be feared, studied, and remembered. Dennis Rader didn't just crave control over his victims. He wanted to control the narrative. He wasn't just playing a game with law enforcement. He was trying to write his own legend. And for a time, Wichita gave it to him. The name BTK was whispered in homes, spoken in fear on the nightly news. He had turned murder into a brand. And in his mind he was finally getting what he deserved: attention. Then he vanished. But the fear never left. After the brutal murder of Catherine Bright and the taunting letters to police, Wichita lived under a cloud of unease. Doors that once stayed open were now locked tight. Children weren't allowed to walk to school alone. Women learned to look over their shoulders. The name BTK was etched into the city's collective fear, but just when his presence seemed constant, he disappeared. Or so it seemed. On March 17, 1977, Rader struck again. His target was 26-year-old Shirley Vian. That morning, Shirley had stayed home sick, caring for her 3 young children. Dennis Rader talked his way into the house with a lie, pretending to need help or a phone. Once inside, he locked her children in the bathroom with toys to keep them quiet. Then he tied Shirley up with cord, strangled her, and calmly left the scene. The children, terrified and alone, would later tell police about the strange man who had been in their home, the man who killed their mother. Just 9 months later, on December 8, 1977, he struck again. This time, 25-year-old Nancy Fox. Dennis Rader broke into her home and waited. When Nancy returned, he confronted her, tied her, and strangled her in her own bed. But this time he didn't flee in panic. Instead, the next morning, Dennis Rader picked up the phone and dialed 911. His voice calm, almost bored, he said, "Yes, you will find a homicide at 843 South Pershing. Nancy Fox." Then he hung up. As police arrived at the scene, another envelope would soon appear, this one with a disturbing poem titled, "Oh, Death to Nancy." It was a crude, haunting attempt at poetry. But the message was unmistakable. BTK was still in control. He wanted everyone to know it. And then, silence. From 1978 to 1985, BTK seemed to vanish. No letters. No killings. No signs. Wichita, desperate for normalcy, slowly began to breathe again. But Dennis Rader hadn't gone away. He had simply gone quiet. He got a new job, working for the city as a compliance officer. He went back to church, became president of the church council at Christ Lutheran. He raised his 2 children, helped with homework, attended barbecues, and volunteered with the Boy Scouts. To his neighbors he was just Dennis. A regular man. Boring even. He had a badge, a family, a title, and a secret. Then in 1985 he returned. Her name was Maureen Hedge, 53 years old. She lived just down the street from Rader. On April 27th, Dennis told his wife he was going out of town on a scouting trip. Instead he took his kit, the ropes, the tape, the bindings, and waited for nightfall. He broke into Maureen's home, murdered her, and took her body to a church where he posed it and photographed it. Then he disposed of the evidence and went home, just in time to kiss his wife goodnight and attend church the next morning. 1 year later, in 1986, he chose Vicki Wegerle. She was 28, a mother, a wife. She had just returned home from dropping her kids off at school. Dennis Rader disguised himself as a telephone repairman. Once inside, he tied her up and strangled her. But this time he took something with him, her driver's license. A souvenir. A symbol of power. In 1991, after 5 more years of quiet, he struck one last time. Her name was Dolores Davis, age 62. Rader broke into her home, bound her, killed her, and left her body under a bridge outside town. The same routine. The same twisted ritual. And then, for over a decade, nothing. Each time he killed, he returned to his wife, to his children, to his church. He went to work. He mowed the lawn. He lived a normal life, while keeping his darkest secret buried just beneath the surface. The most chilling part? No one ever suspected him. For 30 years, BTK was a ghost, an urban legend with a name but no face, a monster who haunted Wichita's memory but left no trail to follow. But in 2004, the silence shattered. Out of nowhere, BTK re-emerged, this time with a taunting hunger for attention that would ultimately lead to his downfall. It began when Wichita's Eagle newspaper received a letter, typed, deliberate, signed BTK. Inside was a chilling message that only the real killer could have known, along with photocopies of Vicky Wegerl's stolen driver's license and crime scene photos never released to the public. The police now knew he was back. The cold case squad was reactivated, and this time technology had caught up. Forensics had advanced. DNA testing was stronger. Computer tracking, once non-existent in the 70s and 80s, was now a detective's greatest tool. BTK didn't realize it yet, but he was no longer in control. Over the following months, BTK began sending more packages, strange puzzles, cryptic letters, and souvenirs from his victims. He mailed cereal boxes with clues. He left dolls posed in disturbing positions. It wasn't enough for him to have killed. He needed to be seen, acknowledged. He wanted his own brand of fame. But then came the mistake, the one that unraveled everything. BTK, in his arrogance, asked detectives a question through one of his letters. "Can I send a floppy disk to communicate with you? Be honest. I need to know. It won't be traceable, right?" The police saw their opportunity, and lied. "Yes," they responded, "it's untraceable." Rader took the bait. When police received the floppy disk in early 2005, they immediately scanned the metadata. One file, a Microsoft Word document, revealed the registered author, Dennis. The last file modification? Christ Lutheran Church. With that one careless move, BTK had exposed his real name and his location. Investigators quickly traced Dennis to Dennis Rader, a compliance officer for Park City and, shockingly, the president of Christ Lutheran Church's council. But they needed proof, conclusive evidence. Without alerting Rader, they obtained a DNA sample from his daughter's medical records. The results were undeniable. The familial match was perfect. On February 25, 2005, Dennis Rader was pulled over in his car while driving home. Calm and composed, he asked, "What's this about?" Moments later, he was in handcuffs. The ghost of Wichita had finally been unmasked, and the city that had lived in fear for decades was stunned to learn that BTK had been hiding in plain sight, behind a mask of normalcy and community service. Dennis Rader didn't just confess. He detailed every murder, step by step, in a chillingly emotionless manner. As he sat in the courtroom, his voice unwavering, his eyes cold, he began to recount the twisted acts of violence he had committed over 3 decades. The audience was gripped by the audacity of his cold, meticulous recollection. Real courtroom audio captures the disturbing clarity with which Rader described each victim's final moments, as though he were reading from a case file rather than reliving the trauma he had inflicted. "I tied them up, tortured them, and then killed them," he said, offering no remorse, no emotion. It was as if he were narrating a casual story, his hands folding methodically as he described each step, each victim, without a hint of regret or empathy. The victims' names, their lives, the violence, they were all mere details in his pursuit of control. The most chilling part was the ease with which he spoke of his actions, of the children he'd orphaned, of the families he'd shattered. In his eyes, there was no remorse, just an unflinching recounting of what he had done. It was a confession, yes, but also a demonstration of the terrifying psyche behind the man. As the prosecution laid out the case, Rader's confession was damning, but the courtroom's reaction to the details was one of horror. The families of the victims, who had waited for decades for closure, were left to digest the unimaginable. The person who had caused them so much pain and suffering was not some distant figure but a man who had lived among them, unnoticed. The sentencing was swift. Dennis Rader was handed 10 consecutive life terms in prison without the possibility of parole. It was the only justice the victims would receive, but for many it wasn't enough. The question echoed in the minds of Wichita's residents. How had they lived among him all those years without ever suspecting the truth? The aftermath was nothing short of devastating. Rader's family was shattered by the truth. His wife, Paula, shocked and horrified, filed for divorce the moment his arrest was made public. The life she had built with Dennis was a lie, one that would haunt her forever. Their children, once proud of their father's role as a church leader, were left to reconcile the man they thought they knew with the monster he truly was. In the community, neighbors who had once trusted Rader were left feeling betrayed and vulnerable. How could they have been so blind? How could they have lived alongside a killer for so long? The emotional toll on Wichita was profound. The people who had once looked at Dennis Rader as just another quiet, unremarkable man now had to accept that the BTK Killer had been part of their everyday lives. The realization sent shockwaves through the city, a city that would forever be haunted by the truth that the killer had walked among them in plain sight for far too long. If you were shocked by the chilling reality behind Dennis Rader's horrific crimes, you're not alone. The dark truth about the BTK Killer is something that still haunts Wichita and the world to this day. But we've only scratched the surface of his twisted tale. To ensure you don't miss any of the latest investigations, chilling stories, and true crime documentaries, make sure to hit that subscribe button now. And don't forget to turn on notifications so you'll be the first to know when we release our next gripping video. Join our community of viewers who crave the truth and uncover the darkest mysteries. Thanks for watching and stay tuned for more.